Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to be importing assets into our project, placing them around the room and learning about materials. I have a list of free assets that I'm going to be recommending that we use throughout this tutorial series, but before we jump into downloading those, I want to talk a bit about copyright and what we're actually allowed to use as developers. You probably already know that we aren't allowed to use absolutely anything that we find on the internet, even if it's free. There are actually a range of copyright licenses that determine what we can and cannot do with a certain product. So what are we actually allowed to use? One rule of thumb is that if the asset does not have any detailing about the license, so it doesn't say if you can freely use it, it doesn't list a specific license, then you have to just assume that the creator retains all copyright of that item. Now, this is especially important if you're working on an actual commercial product or you're releasing something widely to the public. You have to be really careful about the works that you're including in your product. So let's start with some of the simplest licenses. So there are the public domain and the CC0 or the unlicensed licenses, which basically they just waive all rights. So it means that you can use that and do whatever you want. You don't even have to give attribution for those ones. So you can sell it, you can redistribute it, you can modify it, and so on. An example of this is actually a lot of government-owned assets and images. So those from NASA, those will often be in the public interest and therefore in the public domain, kind of like owned by the public and available for use by anyone. With other free licenses are ones that do require attribution, so it means they are a little bit more restrictive, but they're still quite permissive. So those include the MIT license and also the Creative Commons CC-BY. So these mean that you are free to use them as you wish, completely free, including commercially. You can change them, you can modify them, you can redistribute them, but you do have to give attribution. The rest of the Creative Commons licenses are a little bit more nuanced, so we have variations. So you can say that you are not allowed to use it commercially. So CC-BY NC would be that you have to give attribution, but you're not allowed to sell it. So rather than go through all of these, let's actually dive into some of the assets that I'm recommending and then check their licenses. So first up is Kenney, and we are going to be using his Retro Textures 1 for this tutorial. And we can see right here that Kenney lists the license as Creative Commons CC0. So this is kind of synonymous with the public domain. It means that we can do absolutely anything that we want. We don't even have to give attribution. It is often still appreciated by creators that use the Creative Commons license that you do give attribution so that you can actually give support to them. But it isn't legally necessary to do that. And Kenney is really great because he has tons of free assets that are all licensed under the Creative Commons so that you can, do anything that you like with them. So we're probably going to come back to Kenney quite a few times in the series. He has things from 2D assets, UI, sound effects, 3D models, and there's a huge range of styles. So next up, we have another quite prolific asset creator called Quaternius, who also does a lot of things in the public domain, although he does sell some of these assets. So again, the pack that we're going to be using is this one. And we can see that this one is also actually Creative Commons 0. And if we click on that, yes, there we go. So we know that we're allowed to use that one too. So those two are easy. Now, you might actually wonder, as a creator, if you want to give things away for free and allow people to use it however they wish, are there any downsides to using a license like this? And well, kind of yes. So in this case here, we can actually see that this creator said that they licensed their pack under CC0 and then found out that some other creators included their work in an asset pack and then were selling that. And as you can see, they are regretting that choice of using this license because yes, legally there's nothing that they can do. So that is the downside to using extremely permissive licenses. It doesn't put any restrictions on how people can actually use it. So this differs a little bit with something like, and if we go and check out Godot, we can see that Godot is released under the MIT license. And this one is actually really good because it's quite short. This is the entire license. And the only restriction that it gives is that you have to give attribution back to the original creator. So this is actually a pretty good way to stop people doing kind of like what they've done to this person, because if there's a link back to the original product, it would be quite silly for the person to see that attribution and then continue to pay for a product that they don't have to. There are also instances where you might want to place even more restrictions on your product. Creative Commons Share Alike license is exactly what that is. So this basically means that you can use this, you can do whatever you want with it, but anything that is created from this has to use the exact same license. So other examples of this are the Copyleft licenses, so like GPL, GNU. And those are actually quite restrictive, I suppose, because they require that if you use certain software or libraries under that license, then that means that your entire software project also has to be licensed under that. Those licenses aren't very attractive to companies that do want to end up selling a product. They might not want to use your software if it is licensed with something so restrictive. And it's exactly for that reason that my project, my code, that is going to be licensed under the MIT license as well. I want it to be extremely permissive. I want you all to be able to do whatever you want with it and include the code in commercial projects. But I do want to avoid the case kind of like this person over here, where someone is redistributing and selling what I've done. I want to kind of protect viewers or users from accidentally paying for something that they don't have to. So moving on, another model that we are going to be using, or you don't have to use this, but I'm going to be using this, is a little B low poly model. So Sketchfab is a huge distributor of models, but note, not all of them are free and not all of them are using licenses that are permissive. Some of them are quite restrictive. It ranges again from being entirely proprietary or you have to buy it, to public domain, to some of the Creative Commons licenses. So you should be able to check right here what license this is under. So you can see that this one is CC-BY. So remember, that just means that we have to give attribution. And yes, if you do hop over to my project, you can see a complete list of all of the assets that I'm using. So essentially what this means is if we download assets from Kenney and Quaternius, then we don't technically have to give them attribution, but I think that is a good thing to do. Whereas with our friend over here, with the B, we are legally obliged to give attribution. So if you use this one, then you are going to have to leave a credit. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a nice overview of licenses and what we are and are not allowed to use. Let's move on and actually get some assets in our project. All right, so let's go ahead and download this stylized nature pack from Quaternius. So download. So this is actually linking to a Google Drive and it's giving us a bunch of options. So right here, we've got objects, glTF, FBX, and blend files. So these are actually Blender files. So there's a variety to choose from, and we might be wondering what should we be using in our projects. One of the most popular file types for 3D models is actually FBX. So this one is really commonly used for Unity and Unreal. Not only does it have vertex information about how the model is constructed, how many polygons it has also has materials embedded. So the kind of textures, the colors of what it looks like. So you can kind of just drag it in and it just works. So that's, I think, why that one is really useful. That differs to something like OBJ, which just contains the vertex file. You have to go and set up the materials yourself. So it's a little bit more tricky. And the other two, so the .blend file and the glTF, those are a couple other different file types that also come with vertex and material information embedded. Now, yes, what one should we be using? Well, in terms of Godot, it is actually a little bit complicated, and it's a good thing that we just kind of learned about the different kinds of licenses, because for the longest time, you actually couldn't use FBX in Godot. And let me just flick over to... So why is FBX not supported for import? So as you can see here, FBX has a very restrictive license, and it's incompatible with the open license provided for Godot. And indeed, we should all be having a think about that. It is putting restrictions on us. And if we are supporting that ecosystem by using FBX models, well, that might not be a very good thing. So they do encourage us to use less restrictive formats, so such as glTF, such as OBJ, and such as the Blender files. However, another wrinkle is that if we use Blender files, which again are very useful, especially if you are using Blender to make your models and perhaps even going back and forward between Godot and Blender, then that's going to be a really great file type for you to use. You can open it up and then make changes, but you do have to have Blender downloaded for it to work with Godot. So I am going to be saying either Blender or glTF for our uses. So let's continue downloading, and as for all of the other assets, we are also going to preference using glTF. So because this one actually doesn't have a glTF option, as we can see here, so this animated enemy pack, I am going to go ahead and use the blends for this one, which does mean that I am also going to have to set up Blender for this to work. So if we hop back into our demo project, this is pretty much what we had last time. So we had a little character body that can move around, just a little cylinder mesh for our actual player, and also a third-person camera that follows us around, but we can't rotate. So if you download the demo project for this tutorial, you'll see it's slightly different. It has a little bee character instead of a cylinder, but everything else is pretty much the same. And if you're wondering how I made this little bee, it's actually not a model. I just made it with primitive shapes in Godot. So you can see it's made up of just like little cylinders. And I did put materials on these to color the bee though. So I do want to talk a little bit about that first. So if we just click on the floor, so this floor texture right here under primitives untextured, and then if we scroll down to this, the geometry instance 3D and this geometry and then material. So this is where we can actually give this right now blank plane some actual color. So we can add this ourselves if we want it to just be a flat color, let's say. So there you go. We can see that now it is colored with the default just white color. So there's quite a lot of options to play around with here, and I would absolutely recommend having a look at this. I might link in the description to some videos that do deep dives on materials if you're interested. But for now, to just get us going, if we want to just give it some color, what we want to do is come over to this Albedo and then click on this color. And yeah, we want to play around with this slider. So there we go, we can make it green, for example. So we can go ahead and do that with all of the other ones. You can see this is actually exactly what I've done with my little bee. I've given it a yellow color here, and then with the body, I've actually done something a little bit more fancy instead of just a flat color. So there are a lot of things that you can do just with the built-in materials. Like I said, I don't really want to go into details about material today. We are just going to get some of our models working and set up. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's come over to our downloaded asset. So like I said, we either want glTF or Blender files. So for this stylized nature mega kit, there's only glTF. So let's drag that one in. And that's going to import. And then let's grab the assets from Kenney. And finally, this enemy pack. So in this case, we don't have glTF, but we do have the Blender file. So that's the one that we will want. Let's drag that in. Great. So there are all of our files. So at this point, we can start actually texturing all of our objects. So for example, let's come over to Kenney's retro assets. So you can see that there's quite a few, and if we open the preview, there are quite a few textures here. I'm probably not going to be making many actual structures. So a lot of these are bricks and wood, but I'm going to probably just use these grass ones and dirt. So let's go ahead and drag in either the dirt or the grass onto here. And yeah, you can see that that has replaced our color with an actual material texture, but you can see it doesn't look exactly like how it looks here. It's stretched the asset over the entire plane. So if we don't want this and we want it instead to actually tile and look a bit more like grass, then we are going to have to come down here to UV. So the UV is basically talking about the vertices of this square. So the top left corner, bottom left, top right, bottom right. Those are the UVs, the 4 UV points of this texture. So if we change the scale of those into something that's not a scale of 1, then as this gets bigger, you can see that it starts to tile and, well, actually, I suppose, kind of unintuitively gets smaller. So we can keep playing with that until it looks about right. An alternative that we can actually do, though, is tick this triplanar. And you can see this is using a different technique to actually apply the texture to this plane as kind of the default settings for that texture. So this is often a good way to just quickly set things up, especially for textures that are actually quite small over a big landscape and getting it tiled correctly. And you can see if we do that again, let's say with this little bit here, so this little dirt, then we'll want to click on that mesh. So make sure it's the mesh that's selected, not the static body. And then open up the material again, also scroll down to the UV and turn on triplanar. So we're going to want to do that quite a few times to get everything looking how we want. So yeah, have a little play around with all of these until you get something like this. So another thing you can do is actually modify the color of these a little bit. So on top of having this little grass texture here, I can change this albedo and actually tint it a different color. See, it's a lot darker now. So if I want to change that and have it be a little bit brighter, have higher illumination, then we can change this value here and give it a little bit more brightness. So in this way, you can create a sort of more saturated look. But yeah, I think that is about how I'm going to leave that. So next up, let's come back up to the player. So remember, the player right now under my hierarchy, this is the character body. So this is what's doing the work of actually moving around when we press the buttons. This is containing all of the meshes for the bee. So if I toggle that and change its visibility, you can see that it's completely disappeared. It will actually still move around. There's just not going to be any visual indication if it doesn't have a mesh. And then we have its collision shape, which is just that little cylinder, and the camera that's following it. So we can either just delete this or we can hide it. I might actually just go ahead and delete it. And then we're going to grab one of these objects here and drag it in. I think what's just happened is I have spawned it on top of us. And yeah, you can see that it's actually quite a lot bigger than the rest of our objects. So we might want to play around with its scale. It's also facing the wrong direction. If you remember, our little bee was facing the other way. So we will want to turn this little friend around. There we go. So we want to kind of match it up with the other collision shape. So we want to get the mesh itself to be inside that shape. So we don't want to move the whole body because that would be kind of redundant. It would also move the collision shape. So we want to make sure that we're just moving the mesh onto this correct bit. And if we go and hit play now, then we are a little frog. Great. So now finally, what we can also do is start to populate the world with our other objects. So we can grab any of these, so common trees, ferns, and so on, and then just populate our world. There we go. So that is looking a lot more inhabited. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of importing and setting up assets. In the future, we will go into using terrain and reshaping this kind of world using things other than just the primitive shapes that we have here. We are also going to be setting up character animations and also tweaking our camera and character movement to be a little bit more like a frog or a little bit more like a bee. So thank you so much for watching. And if you do want to support me, then I would love to see you over at my Patreon. I'm really thankful to everyone who has checked it out so far, and I would love to see you there. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.